Hey, Chapel family, thank you so much for joining us today. In our brief time together, I want to focus on the greatest commandment. Now, I want to read it from its original place. Jesus states it in the Gospels, but he's actually quoting from Deuteronomy. And the reason why I say that in our time together is because I think sometimes you and I, we can fall into this spot where we have this simple view of the Old Testament, in that the Old Testament describes a perfect and holy God, how that holy God has a set of expectations and rules and commandments in terms of living and being human, and you and I, we fall short of that. That while you and I might not break every commandment, we've certainly broke some of them or most of them, and then Jesus steps onto the scene in the New Testament, and he lives the perfect sinless life that you and I couldn't live. And then he goes to the cross, and because of that, you and I, we can have a relationship with God through Jesus where we're fully accepted and loved. But what I want to point out is that from the very beginning of this story, we see a God who created humanity, and he longs, he doesn't need to, but he longs to have a relationship with his creation, and he wants that relationship to be marked by love. And so we read this in Deuteronomy 6:5. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. Moses wanted to impress this upon the people of Israel. And this was a message that was to be passed on to their children and from generation to generation. That you and I should love the Lord our God with all our heart, our soul, and with all of our strength. I can say it this way. Our entire being is to display that we love God. We are complex creations. We have emotions, we're physical, we're even spiritual, and our entire being is to display that we love God. Now, in our brief time together, I want to focus on just one of those areas. I want to talk about what it means to love God with all of our strength, how to tangibly love God, how to love God from head to toe with our bodies. Now, before I go into loving God with our bodies, I want to briefly talk about this word strength. Now, I'm by no means an English professor, a grammar expert. I'm not an expert in Hebrew, but just doing a little word study on that word strength found here in Deuteronomy 6:5, we see that it's used throughout the Old Testament. It's used both as a noun and an adverb. It's used 298 times, and when we see it as an adverb, think of the word very, or love the Lord your God with your veryness. Now, along those lines, when it gets translated in both the Greek and the Aramaic, we see a translation comes up with the word power and wealth. And what I'm trying to get at, that you and I can love God with our veryness, what I mean by that is not just with our physical body like our limbs, but this also gets at the point of loving God with everything that we have physically. Like whatever resources are at our disposal, we should love God or display that we love God with those. Now here at the chapel, we talk about this idea of our time, our talent, and our treasure. That you and I only have so much time, that God has given us a certain amount. Our life is like a vapor. So how do we love God with our time, knowing that that's one thing we can never get back and we only have a limited supply of it? And then we were given specific talents. And the question is, how do we love God with our talents? Do we use our talents to build our own kingdom that rises and falls with our own life, knowing that we only have so much time? Or do we invest our talents in the kingdom that lasts forever? And that goes with also our treasure. Now, your treasure might not be the same as my treasure, and everyone's to steward their own treasure, but do I put on display that I love God with what He's given me? Are my resources at God's disposal? Does He get my first fruits? Because maybe that would fully put on display that I love God if I show that and demonstrate that what I have, what I steward, I love God with. But I do want to take a few moments and talk specifically about our bodies. We read in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 19, "Don't you know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought at a price. So glorify God with your body." Now, what we read here in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 is that when you and I say yes to God and yes to Jesus in terms of inviting Jesus into our life, giving our life over to Christ, that God by His Spirit indwells our body, that we become a temple of God. Now, people in that day would really understand that, because even at Corinth, you would see temples where gods would dwell. And what Paul was getting at is that you and I now are the dwelling place, both as individuals and even collectively as a community of believers, that we are the temple of God. And what Paul was getting at here is that our body is God's, that I do not own my own body. God does. And so the questions that we can ask ourselves when we think along the lines of loving the Lord our God with all of our strength is, how can I honor God with my body? How can I bring glory to God with my physical self? John, the apostle, in his third letter, 3 John, he's writing to a friend and he says this, "Dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good physical health and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well." Now, John recognizes, again, the complexities that we have, that we're emotional and that we're physical and that we're spiritual, right? And so he is talking about this idea of physical health and spiritual health, and not only that it's important maybe to have both, but also how they can be connected at times. And I do think that is something to think about. That's a good statement there, because I do think sometimes the most spiritual thing you and I can do is doing something physical. But I wanted to take a few moments and focus on our physical health. I'm by no means a health expert. I'm not a dietitian, none of that. But I also recognize that even in our culture, a culture that has technology, convenience, and even processed fast food, I do recognize the disadvantages that come with that when it comes to our physical health. Like when we read about heart disease, obesity, diabetes, those sorts of things. And because you and I live in a society where we can be sedentary at times, where we sit on Zoom calls or sit in the office or work from home, where we have a convenience where we can order anything we want on a screen. That's both shopping for clothes or grocery shopping, but even also fast food like tacos and burgers. And I wonder if you've ever taken the time to think through, how do I love God in all of this? If my entire life is me stewarding my resources and my physical body, should I talk to God about the decisions I make related to that? Now, I'm not looking to sell you this idea of living longer or having this body that, this unrealistic, perhaps unattainable body that social media sells you and I. I'm not going down there. I'm just talking about simple lifestyle choices that provide benefits to us in terms of our overall physical health. I want to talk about habits of health. I think spiritual habits are important, and I'm going to end there. I'm going to land there because I do think that is the foundation. But I do want to ask a few questions as it relates to your eating habits, your movement habits, and even your sleep habits. But in terms of your eating, do you ever think about what you put in your body? Do you ever think about what it means to eat in a healthy, well-balanced way? I'm not talking about restricting yourself from anything that tastes good, not that at all, but do you look to have a balanced nutrition? It doesn't surprise me that some of the healthiest things we can eat are whole foods that are grown, like fruits and vegetables. And again, I'm not trying to jam broccoli down your throat if you hate it, but I'm asking, do you ever think about those things? Because there's great health benefits to a number of those whole foods that you and I can consume that fuel our body, that we can use to glorify God. What about exercise? and movement. Now, I also understand some of us, we have physical limitations. Some of us are predisposed in some ways. Some of us have had accidents in our lives. I understand all of those things. But do you look to get out and move? Sometimes the greatest thing to do is to just get outside and move, whatever that looks like. Or go on a walk. And you and I can also go on a walk with God. And again, that's where I'm going to land in a few moments. But we read that even adults 65 or younger just getting 8,000 to 10,000 steps a day. And again, I understand some of us that might not be possible, but you can do activities that are similar or mimic getting those steps. But adults under 65 that get 8,000 to 10,000 steps a day, or a physical activity that is equivalent to it. Great health benefits, not only to your mobility and the longevity of your mobility, but good for your heart. And I just wonder with a number of those things like cardiovascular disease, just how the numbers in our country, I just wonder if you and I ever look at those health habits and wonder what it would mean to ask God, what does it look like to have a healthy, well-balanced lifestyle? And sleep, of course, that makes sense to me. Why? Well, one, because it's in the beginning of the book. We see that God, He models what it means to be human and what it means to rest. We see that in the first 2 chapters. And again, no surprise that as they do studies and they see the benefits of good quality sleep, of both a quantity and a quality of sleep. Now again, I know for some of us, that might be difficult, whether it's the way we're wired, our brains shutting down, or we're not good sleepers, or if we have physical pain. I understand all of that. I'm just asking the questions of, have you ever thought along these lines of how I can love God with my physical body by even just my health habits? Now, of course, we can honor God with our bodies by the way we take care of our bodies physically, but that also includes a number of things with honoring honoring God with our bodies sexually and beyond that. But I also want to land in a spot because I believe that outwardly we will always waste away. That's the effects of sin. And that inwardly we can be renewed each and every day, regardless of whatever season or circumstance we find ourselves in terms of health. Because I do believe to love God with all of our strength, we ultimately need to rest in Him. And I can't help but think of Psalm 46. Where the psalmist says, be still. Where God says through the psalmist, be still and know that I am God. That is a physical posture that leads to an inward spiritual renewal. But that is a physical place and a physical posture. And so I wonder if you ever do that in your life. Do you find a room, whether that's in your house or your apartment? In your house, is it a room? Is it a bedroom? Is it a room up in the attic? Is it down in the basement? Is it a place where you can shut off the noise? You can shut off the distraction and just get alone and be still with God. Or maybe that's in your car. You drive somewhere, you go for a drive, or you sit in a parking lot, or maybe that's out in a park or next to a river or near Niagara Falls, or you're going down into the southern tier and just getting alone with God in His nature. But I wonder if you ever physically find a spot where God can renew you, because I believe that you can love the Lord your God with all your strength when you and I find rest in Him. And so my question to you in our time together, Chapel family, is this. Do you love the Lord your God with your entire being? Does your entire being put on display that you are in a love relationship with your Creator? And do you love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength?
Hey church family, thank you for taking the time to watch this video. This content was presented at the chapel's annual Equip event. Those who attended the event had the opportunity to submit questions. The following video is the question and answer portion of that event.
So in talking about how to love the Lord our God with our strength, I guess maybe a first question would be, how do you avoid that becoming vanity? You talked about you talked about it in a stewardship conversation. Really, I'm going to steward this temple so that I could be of use for the kingdom, right? But how do you know when you're tipping into vanity and, well, hey, God's going to remake my body anyway, and, all of that stuff, I think, well, hey, as long as I make it to heaven and, it doesn't really matter what I do with this. And, speak into that kind of mindset that would maybe try to dodge some of what you're saying tonight with, well, isn't that just vanity and you just care about the external, and isn't there a whole bunch that we shouldn't even be consumed with? Can you talk to that a little bit more?
Yeah. I think when we think of this concept, I would love for us to think of it more in a lens of how we move and how we feel rather than how we look. Again, we're being fed somebody, whether it's on still on the cover of a magazine because they still print those, or on one of our feeds and whatever social media we consume, and we see this image. And how do I look that way? And I don't think the conversation should go there because we see so many of those individuals that want to look that way. They actually do things that aren't healthy. They're not actually balanced. But I think it's more about in terms of how I feel. And again, as you get older, you see that like when I was younger, I had the Ito's diet, right? I was a single mom. She was working all the time. So we had frozen burritos, Cheetos, Doritos, right? Fritos. Sure. That was the Ito's diet.
Wow.
Right? And so when you're younger or when you're in college, you can just, throw that stuff down your throat, and it doesn't really, either you can't tell how bad it is or detrimental. But as we get older, we see, oh, wow, if I don't late night snack, I sleep better, which again, there's studies for that or whatnot. And I'm not looking to cure anybody. I'm not looking
You're not giving anyone professional medical advice tonight. So,
no.
Our lawyers want us to say that.
So I thank you, Dave Boy.
Yeah, Dave's here.
He is.
Yeah.
I know he's in here. I think it's more about that than trying to chase some sort of unrealistic percentage or number or what the alleged kind of perfect female or male is that doesn't even exist, and more than likely that picture was digitally touched up anyways.
Right. Yeah. Thinking about, you gave us a lot of great scripture to chew on. One more maybe that we could offer up into the conversation comes from 1 Corinthians 6 that says, all things are lawful for me, or all things are beneficial for me. That's in quotes.
Yep.
But not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, Paul says again, but I will not be dominated or mastered by anything. So what would you say to someone who's thinking, yeah, sure, I don't use any drugs, I'm not an alcoholic, I'm not doing this, I'm not a glutton, but I can't imagine going through a day without a Coke Zero. Sorry, I'm picking your favorite drink there.
Yeah.
Or, I stop at Paula's Donuts every Thursday because, I can't imagine Thursday without Paula's. Talking to myself. So what would you say to, it's easy, sometimes it's easy as Christians who maybe, hey, I don't have that sin over there, and that they're a drug addict's clearly dominated by that drug, but where does that same spirit creep up even in our physical health, even if we're not using illegal or harmful, like overtly harmful substances? What would you say to someone who's thinking that way?
Yeah, I just think, where do I run to for my comfort would be one of the first things. And so what life is stressful. We go through, valleys. And the question is, where do I run to? But also, again, we live in this culture where you and I, we can go and we can grab candy bars, or we can grab pints of ice cream, and we could have that as much as we want. And, the question would be is, should I have as much as I have, or should I look to incorporate other things? And again, I'm not looking to just only promote like a whole food diet. I'm just saying are there things in your diet that maybe a medical professional in your life is saying, hey, maybe you need to cut back some of this stuff, or maybe you need to introduce some other things and look to make, healthy habits as a result of that. But again, I think if there's something in my life where I'm like, I just can't imagine not having this every day or whatever, maybe I should, bring that to God and say, God, does this have some sort of stronghold in my life? Like you said, whether it's a perceived harmful thing or not, maybe I should have those conversations with God about that.
And so what you're getting at, what I'm hearing you saying, and I love that. What the first statement is, where do I go for comfort? And where am I trying to find? I mean, you tell us that rest is a huge part of this, but it sounds like we try to fill that vacancy, that hole with, hey, if I had a bad day, that means I'm definitely getting blank, or I just need a whatever, fill in the blank, because I had a really tough conversation, or I'm feeling kind of down, or you minister to college and young adults, so you're navigating a lot of them through, I just went through a bad breakup, or I'm just really stressed about exams, and really what you're getting at, and I think this is helpful for us to think about and do some analysis, is what am I reaching for that's not Christ? And have I ever even had that awareness? And the value of, probably you need some brothers and sisters in your life who have the permission to point those things out, right?
Yeah, and that's why I think I would rather just pose some of these topics or these areas, whether it's movement or nutrition or rest, because those are great conversations to have with others in my life that I'm in community with, that I'm doing life with, that, we can keep each other accountable and encourage one another.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you're a relatively new dad.
Yep.
3-month-old.
Yep.
Millie J.
Yep.
And so how has this changed in your life? Because when you were a single guy, unmarried, no kids, working here at the chapel, and you had all the time in the world, and you could probably meal prep differently and move differently and all of this stuff, how has the last 3 months, the best 3 months so far, how has that changed your ability to do some of these things, and even some of your perspective, and maybe even some of your why that you want to do these things?
Yeah.
For Millie?
Yeah, obviously my life has changed drastically.
How's your rest? Is really what we want to know.
In the best ways. As you can hear,
you sound totally rested.
I sound so rested.
Yeah.
I looked at in that picture too that they put up when I was walking up here. Obviously my life has changed. Now I'm taking care of and helping to take care of another human being. So I feel like I've forgot how to take care of myself in some ways, because you're like, oh my gosh, you get sent home with this baby and you're like, I got to keep this thing alive.
Yeah.
Right?
There's no manual.
No.
Yeah.
And then I quickly found out that in my household, I kind of just became an intern. Just like, I just go to my wife and say, hey, you want some coffee?
Yeah.
What do you need me to do?
Yeah.
I take notes. I'm changing laundry. And hey, that's okay. I feel like I'm overqualified to be an intern. And my wife's just a rock star. So she's doing, obviously, a lot of the heavy lifting. But obviously, I cannot, there were times in my life where I was able to break up workouts and meal prep. I haven't been doing any of that. Every season you need to reestablish new rhythms. And 14 weeks in, I have yet to establish that rhythm. But we're getting there. And but it's the best.
Yeah.
So it's the best thing ever.
Yeah, for sure.
So.
And there's probably also something about your why that, hey, we want to be around.
Yeah. Obviously knowing that, obviously God appointed the day I was born and the day in which I'll meet him face to face. But I want to be, it gives you another reason to say, hey, like I want to be healthy for my daughter. I want to be able to do things with her. And so again, saying, God, listen, I'm going to walk through whatever I'm going to walk through, and I'm going to trust your sovereignty over my life. But at the same time, I'm not a leaf that blows in the wind. I can make decisions, and so I want to make healthy decisions. And so I want to use that to inform.
That's great. Maybe one other one. There was a few questions that came through a lot, actually, about fasting.
Yeah.
And so, is fasting from food important to do regularly? Any thoughts, direction on fasting? Does fasting apply to loving your God with your food habits? Other questions about fasting specifically. Any thoughts there that maybe you could give for us in this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we're called to fast, but not everybody can fast the same way because of the way, the way your body reacts to it. Some people can fast for long periods of time. I wouldn't want to present from up here intermittent fasting and the health benefits and convolute that with the fasting that Jesus invites us to. Now, there's a thing known as intermittent fasting, and whether that's eating in blocks of windows or it's for prolonged times, sometimes 24 to 48 hours once a month. And these health benefits, and again, you can look it up online. There's people who are far more brilliant, and I'm just passing along information that I read. I would not want to convolute that with getting alone with God and saying, God, instead of eating a meal, I'm going to remind myself that I cannot live on bread alone, right? That I need you, that you are my provider. And again, we're invited to fast in a way that isn't to put myself publicly on display. But I will say this, because this was some time ago where I felt like I was called to fast. And it was when I was younger in my faith, and it was my college years and when I was first attempting. But I just remember some really sweet times of just driving away. I was supposed to take my hour lunch, and instead of doing that, driving to a park and just spending time with God, and just how sweet some of those times were. I'd love for us to have a discussion around that. But yes, are there diets that you can again follow that have some some perceived health benefits that some studies show? Sure. But I think when we talk about this idea of fasting so that I can love the Lord my God, I would say that I'd allow God to direct you in that, and I would also listen to any physician, a medical professional in your life. Hopefully you have someone, and I would follow that. But then I would also use that as a time to draw near to your God.
Yeah, I love that. And it's probably in that time that God's going to bring to the surface the stuff that we do tend to reach for, and we may realize for the first time how dependent we might be on something, and until we're actually engaged in this physical fast from food, not for the health benefits, but for the spiritual benefit, that we may not even realize that until we get alone with him. And he may reveal that. He's going to bring it to the surface, and he's going to want to skim that off, say, hey, see, you don't need to be living dependently on this. Doesn't turn into weird legalism where you never have a Coke Zero, I never have a coconut donut, right? Like those are going to be things. Those would maybe take a different shape and form in our lives when we realize I don't need to be dependent on these things. I will not be mastered by anything. And the implication there is except Christ, right? Well, thank you, Jay. Any last comment on this subject that you want to share with us tonight?
No, I just think, there's so many things that God has given us in his natural creation, whether that's, stepping on the ground he created, letting the sunlight hit your face, which is difficult in Buffalo, New York, but
right,
for long stretches. But again, I think we have to figure out what it looks like to live in a culture like this that's technology-driven, comfort. We could easily not move very much. We can very much stay in front of screens or work from home, all of these things. And I just think, there's so many God-given things that aren't, I'm not saying it cures anything, but it promotes good physical health. And you and I should have conversations with God about that, and we should look to implement some of those things.
That's great. Well, let's thank Jay Perillo tonight for what he said. Stay right here for 1 second.